Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Christina Pfeiffer, she, her, hers, and I lead the marketing team here at Agility. I will be your webinar support today, and I'd like to share a few logistical details before we go ahead and get started. We do plan to leave some time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can add them into the chat or into the Q&A function, and Jen and Lisa will do their best to answer them at the end of the presentation. At other times during the webinar, we will ask you to add your comments to the chat, participate in a poll, or maybe use the raise hand button on your screen to indicate that you would like to be unmuted so you can talk verbally with our host. So during the question and answer portion of the presentation, you can do that. And then just also, we will be recording this webinar and we'll send you all an email following our call with a recording and some follow-up information. So I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to our hosts, Agility Principal Jennifer Spenson and LTD Global Human Resources Director Lisa Tyler. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, everyone. So as Christina said, my name is Jen, or I go by Jen, and I'm a principal at Edgility Consulting, which means that I kind of split my time between being a sales lead and a client lead. And I started my career as a scientist, and I have my PhD in cell biology from Harvard, and I was a researcher for about 15 years here in the US and then abroad in London, England, before I became a mom and just didn't see a space for myself in the sciences anymore. And so I pivoted all of those data research and analysis skills into compensation and started at Agility as a founding member of their compensation team about 8 years ago. And I've worked for the last 8 years with one of their co-founding partners to build that compensation practice from what started as a compensation practice into our broader now talent equity consulting practice. And so I bring a lot of institutional knowledge to the work that I've done, as well as about half of my clients are every year are nonprofits, and the other half are charter schools. And of those clients, I would say probably 40% to 50% are small businesses. And so also just have broad sector-wide knowledge around the unique challenges that small businesses face, and how we as an organization can help small businesses address those challenges and provide solutions to those challenges. And so I'm excited to be here with you all today and just tell you a little bit more about that. But before we get into it, I'm going to hand it off to Lisa to tell you a little bit about herself.
Hey everyone, my name is Lisa Tyler and I am the Human Resources Director at LTD Global. I've been with LTD for about 8 years, and I bring to the table a lots of combined experience from both corporate work and nonprofit work. I've done everything from product and product leadership to leading large teams to managing my own business to working in the recruiting and staffing area to general HR consulting, which is where I landed right now. As I mentioned, I've been with LTD Global for 8 years, and we are a consulting and professional services business. I focus on the HR consulting practice of the business, and I'll focus on all of our clients, which are combined between nonprofits and for-profits, usually with a niche of under 100 employees. So we really focus on helping small businesses with both HR and accounting needs if they don't have in-house or providing auxiliary support for their particular businesses. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen and we can get started.
All right, so we'll start first by just telling you a little bit about the organizations or firms that we work for. So I'll start and tell you a little bit about Edgility. Equity is at the heart of everything that we do at Edgility, with the goal of closing wage gaps, closing opportunity gaps, and building leadership benches in our sector that are reflective of the communities we serve. And we do that through 3 different service lines. Our first service line is focused around placing exceptional leaders through executive search and recruitment campaigns, as well as transition support. Our second service line is focused around closing wage gaps, and we do that through our compensation program design, as well as through wage gap assessments and implementation support. And then our third service line is around redesigning talent systems. We work with organizations to help them build talent philosophies, performance management systems, and competency frameworks, as well as run CEO evaluations. We have worked with organizations. We're a nationally recognized firm. We work with organizations across the country, generally working with social justice organizations, the majority of which are charter schools or education organizations and nonprofits, as well as a small set of which are for-profit organizations. And so I'm going to pass it back to Lisa and just let her tell you a little bit about LTD Global.
So thank you, Jen. As the slide shares, the LTD Global has been in business over 21 years, and we provide small and medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies with professional and staffing services, both from an accounting and HR consulting perspective. Let me talk about the pillars that we have. Our services on the accounting side include everything from bookkeeping up to fractional CFO services. So we provide that. From the HR consulting business includes HR operations, compliance audits, policy recommendations. We support hiring and termination, processes and procedures, employee relations, resource solutions with recruitment and staffing. And we also help tremendously with HRIS, or Human Resource Information System, decisions and implementation. In fact, we're doing a major implementation with a couple of our clients as we speak. We feel that we are strategic partners. We are auxiliary support, and we provide guidance and on any and all of our services to our clients when they need it, as much as they need it or as little as they need it. So we like to consider ourselves customized to whatever our clients need. With that, I'm going to toss it back to Jen.
All right, so today we'll start with unique challenges. We'll then talk about unique solutions for small businesses. And then we're lucky today to have one of our joint clients join us, Linda Shore, and she's going to tell us a little bit about a case study work that both LTD Global and Edgility did for her previous organization. And then we're going to finish up with question and answer. So over the next year, we're planning to offer several webinars throughout the year. And we want to make sure several webinars throughout the year that are targeted towards small businesses. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're covering topics that will be useful to you. And so today we just have a quick poll to take. It's shown up on your screen. Please feel free to answer. And we'd like to just know, as a small business, in which area do you struggle the most? I'll wait like a minute for folks to fill it out, and then we'll share back results. Okay, I've seen the bars stop moving, so I'm going to take that as a sign that folks who want to answer have answered. Um, and so what I'm seeing is that about half of you struggle with talent program design, so compensation, performance management design, and then a fair amount of, and then the rest of you all are struggling with ops administration and hiring and staffing, and then the lowest one is compliance. And so, sorry, did that? Oh, okay. Was everyone able to see that on their screen? Did that pop up? Yeah, okay. The results did. Okay, good. I'm going to keep us moving to our next slide. So want to talk about numbers. So the numbers show that 82% of small business employees believe they are underpaid. So the vast majority of small business employees believe they're underpaid. And the majority of small business employees consider compensation and benefits as the most important factor influencing their job satisfaction. And so we hear that it's really important to them and they don't feel like they're getting paid enough. On top of that, we know that 35% of small businesses have a formal compensation strategy. And so we can see this gap where small businesses don't have the framework in place for developing compensation, but staff have this really strong desire to be paid fairly and to have good compensation. And it's really important to their satisfaction in their role. And so that really puts small businesses in this unique place where they have some big challenges that well-established or larger organizations don't necessarily face. They struggle with small teams. Oftentimes, because the teams are small, folks will have multiple roles. Or will play multiple roles, will wear multiple hats. And so it can be really hard to determine compensation for those employees. Oftentimes funding is quite limited, and so it can be difficult to strive for competitive compensation while managing financial responsibility. A lot of times there's minimal or no infrastructure, so making robust making compensation decisions are made without robust HR systems or tools. And I realized I meant to preface this slide by saying while I'm talking, and I saw it was dropped in the chat, please think about what your top 3 challenges are. As I'm talking, you can drop them in the chat. I'll keep going. Oftentimes the pace of the work is pretty fast and there's a fair amount of urgency behind the work. And so you're trying to make quick decisions around compensation. And so, and that can lead to equity concerns. So when decisions are made quickly or made on an individual basis, compensation isn't looked at holistically across the organization, and that can lead to differences in the way that folks are paid within the organization and can make it hard to ensure that that there's fairness and consistency across the organization. Oftentimes, it can be challenging to build leadership and board support, and that's because leaders in the board get used to doing things one way, and it can be hard to kind of manage that change. I mean, you can find resistance to change and resistance to doing things a different way. Career progression and staff retention can be challenging because oftentimes you're creating roles as you go, right? The role has never existed in your organization before. And so you're not necessarily thinking about what's the next step for this role. You're just thinking about what's the role I need today. And a lot of times you don't have job levels in place either to think about how would folks progress through job levels in our organization. And we know that career progression is essential to staff retention. And so when staff don't see a place for themselves to move up in the organization, they can leave and find those opportunities elsewhere. And that can be challenging for retention. And then the last thing that small businesses often face is is problems around salary compression, where because pay is looked at an individual level and determined on an individual level, and it isn't always looked at holistically. You can have issues where new hires are being hired in at the same rate of pay as your existing employees, or even at times at higher rates of pay than your existing employees. And that can lead to compression issues amongst staff. And so Edgility has a roadmap for small businesses around how to tackle these challenges and how to address them when building a compensation program. And that roadmap has 5 stages along the way. The first one is to set your compass. So you want to start by designing your compensation philosophy. You want to get that North Star in place, to help guide you through the rest of your journey on this roadmap. The second step is around paving the way. So crafting an equitable compensation program that's going to work for your organization. The third step is about extending the ladder, making sure that that compensation program you've developed thinks about career pathway and thinks about career ladder and has structured job levels so staff see areas for growth. The fourth stop on our roadmap is around illuminating the path. So doing all the hard work, building the structure is the first step. Building the compensation philosophy, structure, job levels, that's the first step. The second step is making sure that you're sharing that out with staff transparently, and now you're implementing it consistently and fairly across the organization so that you're ensuring internal equity. And then the last stop on our roadmap is around building bridges, and really is about making sure you're taking a proactive approach to implementation by either having an expert that's available to you as a resource as you go to implement, or making sure as well that you've kind of thought ahead about those challenges and develop the policies you need for implementation. And so you're going to see another poll pop up on your screen. And we're just curious, as you look at the roadmap, where are you currently in your journey? All right, I'm seeing things shift around a little bit here. We started with we haven't started yet, but now I'm seeing the largest bucket is really around extending the ladder. So we have structured job levels for growth. Right behind that is pave the way. We've crafted an equitable compensation program. So great to see that. And then we have some folks that are at step 1 or right at the beginning of the road, right at the beginning of their journey as well. I'm going to now go talk about each stop along this roadmap and dive into it a little bit more. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so first, starting with set the compass, define your compensation philosophy. A compensation philosophy articulates core principles for how compensation works at your organization. And it really acts as a I say high level guidance, or really as a North Star to guide decision making and policy setting related to compensation. by having that North Star and following that North Star, it helps you to set a foundation for fair and consistent pay practices. And when you're working on your compensation philosophy, you're also working to make sure that it aligns with your values and objectives, that it's aligned with your talent strategy, aligned with your org strategy, and that it's going to get you to where you want to be in terms of your mission and vision and impact for your organization. Having a compensation philosophy allows you to mitigate challenges that are related to fast pace and urgency. It really encourages everyone to slow down and think intentionally about a series of decision points related to compensation, or a series of choice points related to compensation, and have intentional conversations around those choice points to develop the compensation philosophy. It also is important to building leadership and board support, because it gives your leadership and board support, again, that North Star by which they can that North Star that they can use to guide decisions that they're making, that they may be making related to compensation for their staff. An important part of the defining your compensation philosophy is making sure that you incorporate an inclusive discovery process. And so when we're working with clients, we're working to take a holistic approach to understanding your total value proposition. So we want to understand not only how well rewards or compensation are working for your staff, but we want to understand how well other areas of your total value proposition are working for your staff. We want to make sure that we're honoring diverse perspectives and experiences by collecting input from those folks, and by looking across identities and looking across different groups for different experiences to see where one identity may be having a different experience versus another identity in your organization. By doing that, we begin to build trust with staff, and buy-in with staff, and ownership with staff. When we pull them into the process, they start to feel like they're a part of the process, and they start to feel commitment to the process and commitment to the outcome of the process. We want to make sure when we're running an inclusive discovery process that we're collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. And so really that qualitative data can come through things like focus groups or one-on-ones, as well as working with an advisory task force to collect input around your philosophy design. Again, making sure we're giving staff those opportunities to be a part of the process and to be involved in the process, so we can build that buy-in and trust and commitment to the work. And then as part of that process, we want to make sure that we're identifying strengths in growth areas, as well as priorities staff priorities related to compensation. And so when we talk about our total value proposition, we're again working across your entire talent life cycle to think about what are all of the things, what are all of the things you offer to staff. So not only compensation and rewards, but how do you attract staff? How do you grow staff? How are you doing at assessing staff? How are you doing at engaging staff? What are staff experiences around those different buckets in your total value proposition, so you can understand where your glows are and then where your grows are, so that when you get into the design of your compensation program, you understand what you need to be course correcting for or addressing in that design. All of that input collected from staff and collected from that inclusive discovery process then informs the development of your compensation philosophy. And your compensation philosophy really sits high level, and again acts as that North Star that's going to guide the development of your policies related to compensation within the organization. And so an example of a philosophy and some policies are shown here on this slide. If you want to develop your own compensation philosophy, we have a wonderful toolkit on our website. It's free, it's easy to access. It walks you through the different choice points related to a compensation philosophy and gives you prompts for having those discussions with either an advisory task force or a leadership team, so that you can, again, collect that input, that critical input, and then build the philosophy around that input. And so that's shown on the screen. I'll pause for like 20 or 30 seconds. If folks have a phone and you want to open your camera, you can just click there. And Christina has also dropped it. I see she's dropped it in the chat as well. Okay. Couple more seconds and then I'll get going. So I know there we go. I know screen can be a little easier than the chat. So now moving on to that second stop on our roadmap, and that's around paving the way and crafting an equitable compensation program. At Edgility, we take a balanced approach to designing compensation structures, and it really takes into account 4 different factors: internal equity, external competitiveness, specific org considerations, and organization, fiscal responsibility, and sustainability. And when I'm describing this to clients, I'm oftentimes describing it as levers. So these are kind of 4 levers that you can pull on. They're interdependent on each other, and they don't always work together. Sometimes they work in opposition, right? So if you pull on that external competitiveness lever, you might have to release a little bit on the fiscal responsibility lever. If you pull on internal equity, you may be releasing a little bit on external competitiveness. And so when we're working with clients, we're really thinking about, and working with small businesses, we're really thinking about what is the right balance for your organization, what is going to work for you as an organization and best set you up for success. In terms of the kind of challenges that are mitigated by crafting an equitable compensation program, the first one is that small teams juggling multiple roles. So when we're looking at job descriptions, we're reading those job descriptions to understand the buckets that someone's work falls into. At small businesses, that's often multiple buckets. Someone could have HR responsibility, finance responsibility, and some compliance responsibility. And so we're looking at those buckets and we're creating what we call hybrid roles to make sure that we're representing each of those hats that those staff wear in the benchmark, and that we're pulling salary data that's relevant to each of the roles that that person, or each of the hats that that person might wear. Using this balanced approach allows us to think about limited funding and think about, that fiscal responsibility and sustainability lever. That might be one we want to pull on a little bit more, right? We might have to release a little bit on the external competitiveness piece. And then by building salary ranges and providing range placement guidance, we help our clients to think about or correct for salary compression and think about salaries being across a broader range rather than just at a starting salary or a small range around the starting salary. One question we oftentimes get from organizations is, what can we do if we find ourselves unable to offer market competitive wages to our employees? And so the first thing is that it's really essential to recognize that competitive compensation goes beyond just salaries. Compensation, we think oftentimes of base salary, but that word compensation includes things like bonuses, stipends. It also includes benefits. And so organizations can consider offering additional benefits such as flexible work arrangements, professional development opportunities, or performance-based bonuses to enhance their overall compensation package to staff. You can also think outside of that rewards bucket, right? So I've talked about rewards, I've talked about compensation, but you can think more broadly across your total value proposition and think about things like developing a positive work culture and a supportive work environment, as those can be significant factors in attracting and retaining talent, even when money or the budget is limited. And I can tell you, I've worked with organizations that have really high retention rates and are paying at market. And I've worked with organizations that have low retention rates and are paying above market. And so I can tell you those things outside of compensation, like work environment, culture, growth and performance are all important to staff and all important to retaining staff and can be really critical retention levers. I'm going to move into the third step of our process. That's around extending the ladder. So having job levels for growth, so structured job levels for growth. So this is really about defining clear job levels and career progression pathways. It provides employees and employers with a roadmap for advancement. And so, like I said earlier, oftentimes as a small business, this is the first time you're creating the role, right? It's the first time you're thinking about it. And when you have job levels within the organization, when you have a framework for career progression, you can start to think about what the next step would be for your employees and for your organization, where your organization might need to fill some gaps with talent. That also works for employees. They can start to see the next step, right? And so they can start to think about, okay, I'm here and I want to grow to here, and this is what my salary is going to look like if I can get to this next step. And that helps to encourage professional development and professional growth. And so Edgility not only does work related to compensation, but we also do work related to performance management and competency framework development. And so we work with organizations to take their job levels and drill down a level into those job levels and start to define the skills that are required at each job level so that staff have clarity around the skills they need to grow in their job level to be successful, as well as the skills they need to start developing at the next job level if they want to be promoted and be successful after they're promoted. This helps to mitigate challenges around having minimal or no infrastructure. This is infrastructure, right? This builds career pathways within your organization. It ties those career pathways to salary ranges and to roles in the organization. It provides structure around how compensation and career progression can be thought about within your organization. And then providing that career progression for staff just helps to increase retention and help staff to see a future at your organization. And so this is what job classification framework looks like. It has job levels, as I described earlier, as well as it defines kind of high-level criteria around typical years of experience, org impact, and management scope for roles in each job level. And when you're building a compensation program, what will happen is you'll build your job levels, your roles will then be placed into job levels. So each of your roles will fall into one of these job levels. And then each job level will have a salary range, associated with it. And all roles in that job level are paid on that same salary range. The next step is around illuminating the path and fostering internal equity and transparency. So this involves running an equity audit to understand if there are any gaps in the way that folks are paid within your organization and ensuring that you correct for those gaps, as well as documenting and sharing your compensation philosophies. compensation policies. When your policies are written out and clear to staff, that empowers staff to influence their own pay. So when staff understand the range that they fall on, as well as the criteria they need to grow their own salaries, so how raises are given every year, then they're empowered to do what they need to do to grow their salaries, whether that may be performing at the top of their game or just gaining more years of experience. Having that understanding and having that level of transparency cultivates a sense of belonging and commitment within the organization, and really brings staff, again, builds that buy-in and builds that trust among staff and into your compensation program. And it mitigates equity concerns and centers Agility's pillars of equity. And so Edgility has 3 pillars of equity. They're clarity and transparency, fairness and consistency, and inclusion and belonging. If your policies are clear and transparent, staff know what to expect from your organization. This helps to prevent assumptions about decision-making criteria and makes your total value proposition less fuzzy. Just makes things clearer, right? Once expectations are normalized, once you've done the first step, you need to make sure that you are implementing policies fairly and consistently across the organization. This oftentimes means regular audits, like pay equity audits or performance management audits. It means things like leadership training, as well as clear decision-making autonomy to prevent exceptions from undermining the system. And then finally, once you have clear and consistently implemented policies, they only work if they impact all staff similarly, no matter their identity, role, or background. And so it's important to prioritize inclusion and belonging to ensure well-intended policies don't leave some folks behind or leave some folks feeling undervalued, isolated, or disadvantaged. The last step of our process, step 5, is around building bridges and taking a proactive approach to implementation. This is a critical piece of this is ensuring that you have access to an expert. So ensuring that you have someone that can anticipate challenges for you and help you address them proactively. And when maybe that you don't anticipate challenges and they pop up, that you just have that person you can like phone it in, right? Phone a friend and talk to them and get a little coaching support so that you can help correct for those challenges or address those challenges. That helps to minimize disruptions and maximize effectiveness for your new program. And it also just builds leadership and board support because when your leaders and your board are bought into the process, when they believe in the process, when they understand how everything works, when they have the trainings they need and the support they need from experts, then they can make sure that policies are implemented fairly and consistently across the organization. And they also help to build buy-in and trust with staff as well, so they can bring staff along on that journey as well. And so I'm going to hand it over to Lisa to tell us a little bit about how LTD supports clients with implementation.
Thank you so much, Jen. It's work said and done. The question will come up, well, what happens next? How do we implement all of this? One of the things is having the compensation framework done allows for an easier implementation. Why? Because of the ideas and concepts that Jen just described. It provides for a transparency of progression, and it sets expectations. So the inclusive nature of the work that Jen just reviewed assures a smooth implementation of salary and position changes, since employees' perspectives were already part of the process. The foundation has been laid and the expectations have already been set. In addition, it's already aligned with the organization's objectives. As she mentioned, you have leadership and or board support. The process engaged the employees as part of the process. So the work would assure that the salary changes are aligned with both the organization's retention and growth strategies. In terms of documentation, Jen talked about documenting your compensation policies and related HR policies, and that helps to provide additional support for new hires or anyone else in the organization who needs to understand what the policies are, how they work, and how they can be engaged in terms of supporting their own growth and development within the organization. And so, because growth could also be promotional or it could be lateral, and it could be in job. All of those things can happen. So it's important that these things are documented. In addition to that, it provides data by which staffing guides staffing budgets. So armed with the data, leaders can determine how to best manage compensation and benefit costs. It's another area that Jen talked about. In a situation where we worked together, there were a couple of levers that were used in order to make sure that those compensation, let's say, adjustments were going to be able to be sustainable and achieved through the existing budget, which in small businesses can be a constraint. So there were ideas that were generated to make that happen. And it also sets the stage for newly created positions by providing a framework for additional roles as needed when the organization scales up. And lastly, it provides a roadmap for retention and professional growth. Because as Jen described earlier, you can have retention bonuses in job. It links to performance management. You can have increases in level and or you have a very smooth path on promotions for additional levels as your organization grows. So that's a summary of just the high level steps of implementation. LTD Global has been doing this and actually is continuing to do this in a number of different situations. We also support that through handbooks, through supporting and documenting in HR information systems, so that employees have an easy guide book that they can consult and they can own their own advocacy as part of the organizational process. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce Linda Shore, who is our mutual client, and we did some work with her and her organization together.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lisa. I'm Linda Shore. I'm the former CEO of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. I retired 3 months ago. And so what I want to do is tell you the story of how we used Edgility and also LTD Global to develop our own compensation guidelines. A little bit about the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, which is a mouthful, I know. We're headquartered in the city of San Francisco, meaning that our staff is working in the most expensive place to live in the world. We have a national presence. We do work across the country with contracts from the National Science Foundation, from NASA, from various other government agencies, which means while compliance was really low on the totem pole for you, it's huge for us, federal compliance. We were founded in 1889, so we're about 135 years old, which means we have a long history, which is wonderful, but it's also a history of compensation and the way compensation has been formulated, which is was a little all over the place. We do not have a lot of turnover. The average staff member in our roughly 12 to 14 person staff is about 15 years. The longest tenured staff member has been with us for 30 years. And we recently hired a few people, but I had been the CEO for 10 years, making me a youngster compared to the majority of the staff. The staff was primarily professional, creatives with science backgrounds, with advanced degrees in either science or education or both. The goal of the organization is to promote science literacy and science interest through the lens of astronomy. So we're an education society primarily. So where did we find ourselves before we brought Edgility on specifically, since I'm going to focus on the compensation piece? The cost of living in San Francisco was always high, but getting out of control. And rents and housing was getting nosebleed expensive, and staff was increasingly feeling the stress of not having enough money, feeling underpaid. The board and myself also felt like the staff was significantly underpaid, but didn't know what to do about it. The way we set compensation, as you can imagine, if someone was hired 20 years ago and received a salary, they basically received that salary with increases if their responsibilities increased. But there was no clear guidelines for compensation because, frankly, we hadn't hired anybody new in so long. This third piece is that the society would like to grow. We'd like to go from 15 employees to, say, 30 employees and do additional kinds of work. But we knew that if we brought new employees onto the organization, we'd have to pay them more than we pay our current staff. So the problem of salary compression and inequities would creep into the system pretty rapidly. I was blessed with a very, very sympathetic board that recognized the importance of the staff, that they are our most important asset. There's not a lot of places I can go to get astronomy educators with strong backgrounds in astronomy and education. It's not like trying to get finance people or, it's a small pool to draw from. So it was actually the staff, members of the staff, who identified Edgility because they had heard a presentation. They came to me and asked if we could bring them on. I spoke with the board, and I'll have to say the challenges were, and tell me if you haven't thought about this, how are we going to pay for this? We have a small operating budget. We're a small nonprofit. We're about a $2.8 million operating budget. This is going to cost money, isn't it? Well, the truth of the matter is we had to do it because we were starting to lose employees for the first time in decades. And we decided it was worth the investment for two reasons: to retain our staff. And if we are going to grow and bring on staff, it's important to be very transparent about what the levels are and where you're going to enter into the compensation landscape. It was also really important that staff see what their career progression is going to be. And it was important then, when we work with LTD Global, to create performance expectations, which we also didn't have, to tie those into the compensation levels. So we needed to create a package of all of this for the employees, but also I knew I was going to retire, and I wanted to give the next CEO that comes after me the tools that they need. So that's where I am. And that's just a quick summary. And they have done a fabulous job. They helped create, I think, what are going to be very solid compensation guidelines, which we already implemented. And it allows the board to see, hang on one second. Sorry, I'm at home and I've got gardeners. It allows the board to see what kinds of fundraising that's going to have to be done to meet the financial realities of paying the staff an equitable wage. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Linda. Lisa,
I'll be right back.
Lisa, did you want to add anything or?
Only that we continue to support the work. We are rolling out a new HR information systems platform, which is going to allow for not only the information from the salary ranges to be in the system, but also tied very closely to the performance management, which we're working with the current CEO on. So it all, we're using Rippling. Someone just asked. Well, that's the platform we are moving to, and we are right smack in the middle of it. And so by the end of this month, it'll be up and running. It's already actually partially running, but a lot of these items are going to be resident so in the system so that the employees have direct access. As Linda mentioned, it was employee driven, so there's already a lot of buy-in and trust to the policies that were developed. And the organization did make some critical budgetary trade-offs over in the overall compensation that they're awarding their employees so that they could make this work effectively for the employee body. And as she mentioned, it's strongly, supported by the board of directors.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Linda. I'm going to move to our next slide, which is a Q&A. So we have about 7 minutes left today for you all to just ask anything. Both Lisa and I are happy to take questions. You can drop them in the Q&A. Or Christina, you might have to tell them the options. They can drop them in chat. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you'd like to verbalize your question, you can use that raise hand function and I can unmute you to allow you to speak directly with Jen and Lisa, or you can use the Q&A function or enter your questions in the chat. And I'll be monitoring all of them to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. If we're not able to answer your question today, we will provide Jen and Lisa's email so that they can ask or so they can answer them directly. So it looks like we have a question from Lily. How have you seen hybrid or remote work, like moving to other states, play in compensation design?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's been made all too real by the pandemic. And so there's kind of a number of ways to tackle that. And when we're working with organizations, we're really working to make sure that we're picking the solution that works best for them. For small businesses, oftentimes it's basing your entire compensation design on one market. And then applying that across all of your staff. So choosing one geography, say the national average for salaries, and then applying that to all staff. And the reason why that oftentimes makes the most sense for small businesses is that it's the easiest to implement. And when you have a small team, that's typically what's going to work best for you. Another way that we work with organizations and some small businesses choose to move forward is to use tiers across the country. So to have a tier of like the most expensive cities and they get a premium applied to their salaries because they're living in the highest highest cost of living areas, as well as the highest cost of labor areas. And then have like a middle tier, right, for the geographies that fall kind of in the middle tier, and then have like a bottom tier for kind of those less expensive geographies. And again, so really it's about the client and what their needs are. Some of them just choose one geography and apply it to all staff regardless of where they live. Others choose to use a tiered system and move staff between those tiers as staff move between locations. Linda, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add that for us, that was a very critical issue. About half of our employees are remote, actually, and increasing. And so what we decided to do was use San Francisco, use the most expensive city as the salary that everybody would get because of the equity issue, that we felt that it might be unfair to pay people in San Francisco significantly more than somebody, say, working in Georgia, that might appear fair on the surface, but over time would create tension. And that was just a decision my organization made, but I can imagine other decisions.
Yeah. I'm gonna move us to the next slide, but also answer questions in the chat. So I know Rebecca asked, how long did it take from start to finish? So Agility's process is generally 4 months from start to finish, and that's to the end of program design, with then understanding that implementation happens after that, right? So as Linda said, it for them, it was about 6 to 8 months from the start of their work with us to where they got it implemented at her organization. And so half of that time was spent working very closely with Agility to build the program. And then the other half of that time was largely done internally and with LTD Global support, so that they could get it implemented.
That's exactly right.
So on the screen, there's a survey. You can please take the survey. It's a QR code. And before you leave, I'm also happy to take additional questions and answer them as people are taking the survey, if you have things you want to drop in the chat.
We have one more question for Lisa and Linda. So they've just started their journey with Agility, and they're thinking about the post work, that implementation. Can Lisa or Linda expand more on LTD's role in implementation?
Okay, so I can start, and Linda, feel free to jump in. There was a number of decisions that the organization made as it related to thinking about their compensation strategy, which resulted in, let's just say, new business rules to help guide their performance management policies, which we are still discussing because there's some tweaks that they're making as we speak with that. In addition, as I mentioned, the information from the salary ranges will be, they're understood by the team already, and will be not only in any handbook documentation, but also in the platform. The platform that we decided on was really driven by all the things that we talked about today. Looking at not only where the organization is today, but where they're expecting to be tomorrow, and making sure that all of those features can be housed in an area that's central to the organization. So with that being said, there's a number of things, because compensation policies have to be tied to the job descriptions. There's decisions that you can make that are within the scope of what someone's already doing. There's discussions about, as they grow, what new positions can be linked to that framework, and using that as a baseline, as well as how to make sure you have tweaks in your salary ranges. But I think one of the key areas that I thought was interesting in the work that we did in LTD Global was understanding the trade-offs, because sometimes small businesses and nonprofits have a very flat budget. So it's very difficult to figure out how we're going to make this work. And so I want to highlight that the leadership team, with the board support, made some and with engagement from the team, from the employee team, strategic decisions. So they sort of tweak benefits, if you will, in order to make sure that the overall compensation made sense for the employees. You can
Thank
go ahead.
you all so much for joining us. We're at the hour mark, so I'm going to go ahead and let you all go. But if you would like to learn more about Agility or LTD, please go to their websites. There's a lot of really great information there, and we will be sending an email following up with the recording of this presentation. And hope to see you and talk to you all soon. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.